According to Lovecraft, a race of beings called the Great Old Ones ended up descending to Earth when it was still young, but they entered into a cosmic war against another race, which would be humanoid peoples. This race ended up driving the Great Old Ones away for a while, but when the waters rose, they ended up sinking the cities of this new race, which allowed the Great Old Ones to rule again. But who exactly are the Great Old Ones, and why did they create life here on Earth? What are the other races of Lovecraft's gods? And most importantly, who exactly is Lovecraft, and how is his racism involved in this entire universe? You'll see all this and more in this video. Just a reminder, if you're new to the channel and you like this kind of topic, go ahead and subscribe because there's a new video every week. Please like, share, and comment on the video because it really helps me out. Thanks so much. And speaking of the guy who gave his name to this mythology, Howard Phillips Lovecraft, he was an American writer who became very well known as the father of cosmic horror. Although there are a lot of people who say he is and some who say he isn't, but either way, he became very well known for that. He was born on August 20th, 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island, and he was part of two Anglo-Saxon aristocratic families, the Phillips family and the Lovecraft family. Keep that information in mind for later use. If I remember, that is, right? Lovecraft probably never had a steady job because he couldn't even finish school properly because of the nervous breakdowns he had. So he had to get an informal education. Just so you know, he didn't even properly finish high school or the equivalent of that at the time. And on top of that, after his father and grandfather died, his family had to move to smaller and much simpler apartments. Lovecraft, to pay the bills, did all sorts of little things. He was primarily a ghostwriter, writing stories without taking credit for them. The copyright would go to the company or others. He also worked as a proofreader for newspapers and magazines and as a clerk. Overall, he earned very little, and he went through a lot of hardship. In one of his letters, he even mentioned it. He spent a long time consuming only bread and water. It's crucial for you to know the things I mentioned. Because all of this that happened to Lovecraft since he was a child, the nervous breakdowns, the problems at school, the romantic and family issues and everything else ended up combining with the nightmares he always had. And that made him create a very rich universe, his own mythological universe, which would end up inspiring many things even today. The most interesting thing of all is that Lovecraft was an atheist, but he loved studying chemistry, occultism, astronomy, and mythology. It should also be mentioned that even though we consider Lovecraft's mythology to be one big, unique story, he didn't write them with that in mind. The stories are largely independent, with some connections and references between them, but they are mostly self-contained and unique. And these stories can be divided into three types. The dream cycle, or stories in the dreamlands, where you have, for example, the stories of Randolph Carter, who some even say is a personification of Lovecraft in his own universe. The Cthulhu cycle contains the most famous stories, such as the Call of Cthulhu and At the Mountains of Madness, and the unique horror stories like The Tree. But when we treat everything as a single mythology, we need to talk about cosmogony, which would be a story that basically every mythology has. Since ancient peoples didn't believe that we simply came from nothing, in Norse mythology, everything is created by Odin, Vili, and Ve. In Greek mythology, there's Kalds, and in Egyptian mythology, there's Ra, Adam, and Amel. And in Lovecraft's mythology, it's no different. There's a primitive being who supposedly created everything, called Azathoth, the demon sultan, who with his supreme power would have created everything by mere chance. And nowadays he ends up being located at the center of infinity and profane chaos. But despite all this power, this is where Lovecraft's first atheistic view appears in his work. The all-powerful creator and primitive being ends up being an idiot god who doesn't know about the things happening around him, even being called the blind idiot god. Azathoth is the center of the Cthulhu mythos, which is called that because of its first published story. And the creature that gives its name to the story is one of the great old ones. They are a group of abominable and terrifying beings, ancient, powerful, and wise, beyond anything that could make sense in a human being's mind. These beings have been meddling with the earth and with life since the smallest cellular life appeared here. They would have a plan that is incomprehensible and difficult even for their most faithful followers who perform those bizarre cults. And their plan would basically be to destroy the world as it is known by humanity. And the way this whole secret is revealed in each account is very interesting, because it isn't told the same way in every story. It doesn't follow a chronological order like it happens, for example, in the more classical mythologies. These truths about the cosmic terror that haunts humans appear at specific moments in the stories. Usually those parts where something stranger and more supreme is revealed to the narrator of the story. The narrator, usually the protagonist, sometimes narrates in the third person. These moments end up completing information found in other texts, thus showing the established cosmic order. In the case of the Call of Cthulhu, the protagonist ends up entering this universe when he finds some notes and texts written by his great-uncle, who was a very successful specialist in Semitic languages and inscriptions. The protagonist inherited the deceased's belongings. As he continues his investigation, he ends up meeting other people who also had experiences with these strange beings. The first of them is an artist who every night ends up dreaming about a strange being, a humanoid octopus with dragon wings and an octopus head. The other person he meets is a police inspector named Legrasse, who ended up finding a statuette of this creature. It's kneeling with its hands on its knees and its wings clearly visible. The inspector also ends up learning about some strange cults that worship this creature. These members of the Dragon God People cult were located in various places around the world. The deepest and scariest forests of New Orleans, the most sinister and icy places in Greenland, in the middle of the Arabian Desert. Actually, that's where the group's leadership would be, and also in the inaccessible mountains of China. This is the passage where it talks about the cult and about the ancients. They worshipped, according to what they said, the great ancients who lived many ages before the existence of man and who came to the newly created world from the sky. These ancients had now disappeared into the earth and under the sea, but even dead, they had passed on their secrets in dreams to the first man who established a cult that never died. This was the cult they professed, and the prisoners claimed that it had always existed and would always exist. The cult in distant, deserted, and shadowy places all over the world, until the time when the high priest, Cthulhu, and his dark dwelling in the mighty city of Willier, upon the waters of the sea, would rise and once again bring the earth under his dominion. One day he would call when the stars were right, and the secret cult would always be waiting to set him free. And as you saw, this cult would exist until the moment when Cthulhu would awaken and destroy humanity. But still in that same story, there's a physical description of the Great Old Ones, who wouldn't have bodies formed in a way similar to humans, but by something else unknown that is neither flesh nor bone. They all lived in stone houses in the strange city of Rillia, and there they were kept by the spells cast by the great Cthulhu. And even though they are now asleep, they are able to communicate with the most sensitive men through their dreams. These great old ones, Castro continued, are not made entirely of flesh and bones. In a way, that image carved in the stars did not prove it, but that form was not made of matter. When the stars assumed the correct configuration, they could transport themselves from one world to another through outer space. But when the stars were not favorable, they could not live. However, even though they no longer lived, they never truly died. They all lay in their stone dwellings in the great city of Rillier, preserved by the enchantments of the mighty Cthulhu for a glorious resurrection when the stars and the earth were once again ready for them. When that time came, however, some external force would need to release their bodies. The enchantments that preserved them intact also prevented them from making the initial move, and all they could do was remain awake in the darkness and meditate while millions of years passed by. They knew all that occurred in the universe, communicating telepathically. Even then, they stayed aware. Their tombs went after endless ages of chaos. The first man appeared. The great old ones spoke to the most sensitive among them, shaping their dreams. For only in this way could their language reach them, the fleshy minds of mammals, of those men who received the calls of the great old ones. Bizarre cults emerged, however. Unlike the more classic mythologies, these beings did not create humanity or any other creature with the purpose of being worshipped, but rather for a more utilitarian purpose, like serving as food, for example. They don't want to destroy the world because they hate humans or anything like that. Other living beings to the great old ones are seen as ants. They don't care about us at all. All of this is in a way explained not in the Call of Cthulhu, but at the Mountains of Madness. In that story, the protagonist is a geologist who is on a scientific mission in Antarctica. And there, he and his group end up discovering frozen bodies of intelligent beings from an unknown species. And along with them, they also discover the remains of a dead metropolis that was inhabited by these beings. It doesn't take long for everyone there to end up discovering records that were left by these creatures, which confirms that those were the great old ones, and they created all life on Earth to serve their purpose. Working underground at 9:45 with light, I find a monstrous barrel-shaped fossil of completely unknown nature, probably vegetable, unless it's a grown specimen of some unknown marine radiate. Tissue evidently preserved by mineral salts, tough as leather, but surprisingly flexibility has been maintained in some places. Marks of broken pieces at the ends and sides, 6 feet from end to end, 13.5 tenths central diameter, tapering to 1 foot at each end, with a barrel with 5 protruding ridges in place of staves. The lateral breaks from thin cosmos occur at the equator, in the middle of these ridges. In the grooves between the ridges, there are curious protrusions, honeycombs or wings that fold and spread like fans, all very damaged except one, which gives a wingspan of almost 2 meters. The arrangement resembles certain monsters from primitive myth, especially the ancient legends in the Necronomicon. This story confirmed what we had already seen, that the ancients came down from the stars. But remember when I said that one story can complete another? So, at the Mountains of Madness shows us that humans are not even close to being the first beings on Earth, nor are we the most intelligent, because it talks about another race of beings, peoples, that ended up emerging and even fought a great and cosmic battle against the old ones, even forcing them to retreat. But later they ended up succumbing, and the old ones returned to reign. Another race, an earthly race of beings in the form of people, and probably corresponding to the fabulous pre-human offspring of Cthulhu, soon began to filter in from the cosmic infinity, and triggered a monstrous war that for a time pushed the old ones completely back into the sea. A colossal war, a blow in view of the increasing settlement of lands. Then suddenly, the lands of the Pacific sank again, taking with them the terrible city of Relia and all the cosmic peoples. So the ancients were once again supreme on the planet, except for a dark fear about which they did nothing. I don't like to talk. In Lovecraft's mythology, there's a kind of sacred book. Not exactly sacred because it's cursed, but you get the idea. I'll summarize as I've covered this book in detail in a video on this channel, linked in the card and description. It's called the Necronomicon, and it was written by the mad Arab named Abdul Hahed. This writer himself ended up disappearing, possibly being killed outdoors by one of the creatures described in his book. And besides talking about these creatures, the book also contains necromancy spells, how to make contact with the entities, bring these beings back, banish them, and how to worship them. But reading this book is extremely dangerous. It can lead to madness, death, and awaken feelings that aren't even from this world. Several copies of it were destroyed by order of the Pope, but there are copies in the British Museum in London and in the Library of Paris. There are many, many types of beings in Lovecraft's universe, but here I'm going to focus on the 3 main races that are connected to the deities or to the aliens, which are basically the great old ones, the outer gods and the elder gods. Starting with the great old ones, which I've already talked about a lot in this video. They are those entities that are here on Earth hibernating, and they are the creators, rulers, and supreme gods of this planet. There are several of them, but I'll mention a few here. Some were created by Lovecraft, others weren't. Gloom, the corrupter of flesh, The master of the temple is described as a great slug-like abomination, or similar to a slug, although he hides his true nature behind a statue of Dionysus. In the more expanded Cthulhu stories by other authors, they ended up adding a kind of eroticism to humanity's fascination with gloom's false appearance. Gobageg, the twice invoked, is also known as the Moon Ladder, and one of his visions is where he is seen by Dunford in Mountains of Madness. And once invoked, Gobageg literally drags the entire continent as he rises, causing the whole world to collapse. Raster is Cthulhu's brother, and is also known as the Yellow King, or the Unnameable, or the God of Shepherds. He can appear in the form of a yellow octopus full of tentacles, or dressed in a yellow hood, and having octopus feet. Currently, Raster is in Aldebaran. If you want to know more about him, I have a video about him here on the channel. Cthulhu is the most famous of them, the priest of the Great Old Ones. In his octopus form, he sleeps at the bottom of the sea in his city called Relia, waiting for the day when he will finally be awakened and will bring destruction to humanity. If you want to know the story of the Call of Cthulhu, there's also a video here on the channel. Despite the extreme power of the Great Old Ones, they are below the so-called outer gods. There isn't a very clear and general distinction between them and the Old Ones, but basically, these gods are found outside of Earth, and not just outside of Earth, but even outside our own solar system. And yet they are able to influence everything that happens here from deep space or even from beyond our dimension. And as far as I know, there isn't even any mention of this class in Lovecraft's works. And it seems that this classification actually came from a Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. It's kind of an interpretation of what Lovecraft calls the outer gods or other gods. There are several of them as well, with perhaps the main one being Nyarlathotep, known as the Crawling Chaos, who is the son of Azathoth and can change his form at will, and having probably been all the evil entities known to man. He can also change reality, and he is his father's messenger. Boff is the source of impurity residing in the cave of Iqua, which is located on a strange continent called Hyperborea. It is a horrible dark gray protein mass, and it is considered the ultimate source of all erroneous creation and abomination. Yog-Sothoth is trapped outside space-time beyond the last gate, and has the form of a mass of flesh filled with eyes. And according to the story of Through the Gates of the Silver Key, he would be the ultimate form of all the greatest minds in the universe. He would also technically be omniscient. And even though I'm putting him here as the outer god, like I said, Lovecraft never mentioned this class in the stories. And in the Silver Key, at some points it even suggests that he might be a great old one. Azathoth is the being that created everything, and is almost always portrayed as the supreme being in Lovecraft's universe. And even so, he is not omniscient like Yog-Sothoth, but there's an explanation for that. Remember I said that Lovecraft is an atheist? So according to some, Mazotov would basically be Lovecraft's vision of God. Even though Mazotov is all-powerful, he's still kind of useless for some things. He's not exactly at the center of the universe like many people say, and even like I've said here before, actually he's in the middle of all the profane chaos that would, in theory, also be outside of space and time. Outside the ordered universe is that amorphous plague of the deepest confusion that blasphemes and bubbles at the center of all infinity. The boundless demon Sultan Azathoth, whose name no lips dare speak aloud, and who gnaws hungrily in inconceivable dark chambers beyond time and space, in the muffled, maddening beats of vile drums and the thin, monotonous whine of accursed flutes. There is an unfinished work by Lovecraft called Azathoth, which talks a lot about dreams. And as you saw in the previous excerpt, it says that he is surrounded by beings playing bizarre instruments, which makes many people say that actually this music played by these creatures is to keep Azathoth asleep, because everything is his creation and comes from his dream. There's said to be a certain funny argument when you say that Azathoth is the supreme being of the Lovecraft universe, right? Because there are people who say it's Yog-Sothoth, because in the Dream Quest of Carter, he ends up meeting this creature. It claims to be the supreme archetype, but as I mentioned, each story can be independent from the others. Kind of like each story has its own main deity there. Despite his lack of intelligence, Azathoth's power of creation and destruction surpasses all others. After all, he created everything by mere chance. There is also a third class of gods in Lovecraft, the so-called elder gods, or ancients, whatever you want to call them. They are basically the opposite of the evil gods I've talked about so far, being protectors, or at least being very peaceful towards humanity. Many of these beings are actually gods known from other mythologies, as you will see here. For example, Nodens, who was a Celtic deity and was incorporated into Lovecraft's myths. In this case, Lovecraft himself incorporated this one. He was served by the Night Gaunts, and he is benevolent, opposing Nyarlathotep. Bastet, the goddess with a cat's head from Egyptian mythology, also appears in Lovecraft's universe. In fact, it was she who made the cats take revenge in Ulthar. Cthulhu would be Cthulhu's brother. Basically, he was identical in appearance to his brother, except he was as good as Cthulhu is evil. There's Hypnos, who is the Greek god that was also incorporated, and Vosvados, who was the Flaming One, the Lord of Universal Spaces. He is an elder god who appears as a hooded being, surrounded by green flames and with eyes of fire. And, according to some, he is seen as the son of the elder god Nodens and the great Ivera Latalia, and he has a twin brother named Yagdita. It's no secret to anyone that these stories by Lovecraft are filled with racism, xenophobia, and various other types of prejudice. Basically, everyone who wasn't from the Anglo-Saxon culture like him was looked down upon. And remember when I told you at the beginning that he came from an aristocratic family? So in a way, you can see that Lovecraft was very frustrated for being an aristocrat and not getting the recognition he thought he deserved, which made him extremely arrogant. The descriptions he gives of his creatures, and even of those who worship these creatures, as incomprehensible beings, hard to explain, disgusting, and terrifying, are nothing more than Lovecraft's view of other cultures, of people who were different from him. But he didn't just put what he thought about other cultures in his stories. He also included what he thought about the reality he lived in. Randolph Carter, who would be Lovecraft's alter ego in these stories, makes it very clear several times that he doesn't want to be part of reality in which he lives, that he is tired of this world and this time and everything else. And Carter even manages to go back in time to become a child again. And that's probably what Lovecraft wanted. He was tired of the world he was living in, and he didn't feel very good about the changes that were happening, not even in the city where he lived. In fact, cities in Lovecraft's works are usually cursed, especially the city of Arkham. And I've seen a lot of people saying that because Lovecraft was a racist and a jerk and everything else, his works should be canceled. I disagree with the notion that he's forgotten. In a way, he's already canceled. I mean, with his identification canceled, he died a long time ago. And also because his stories help us understand exactly what was happening at that time and how people thought as well. And putting aside the disgusting part of the stories, Lovecraft's works were so influential that they inspired many modern creations. Batman's City of Arkham and the game Bloodborne are heavily influenced by his writings, among countless other examples. It's very well known. It even appears in the opening of Rick and Morty. Finally, what I think should be done regarding Lovecraft's work is exactly what these works I mentioned have done, which is simply to absorb only the good parts. And of course, always remembering and criticizing the fact that Lovecraft was a racist idiot, among many other things as well. If you watched the video up to this point, leave a like so I know you enjoyed it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share the video, and leave a comment. Thanks, see you, bye.